it is possible for all Christians to celebrate Easter on a common date.
But if such a thing is to happen, churches will have to learn how to unite.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here is your host and moderator.
Thank you, viewers, for joining us today. My name is Andrea Luxton. I am the president of Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan. And we have a fascinating conversation. But first of all, I'd like you to meet our panelists.
Hi, I'm Tom Plumley. I'm a minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I serve as senior minister at First Christian Church, Fort Worth, Texas.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I serve as senior rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
My name is Mel Robeck, and I'm an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God who serves my church at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California, as Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations.
Thank you all very much for joining us. And here is a topic for today. At the Council of Nicaea in 325, the bishops agreed that Easter should be celebrated each year on the first full Sunday after the full moon following the vernal equinox. That sounds complicated, and through the centuries it has become even more so. Ultimately, the churches in the East, Orthodox churches, and the churches in the West, Catholic and Protestant churches, chose to apply this formula to different calendars. The Orthodox chose the Julian calendar, while Catholics and Protestants chose the Gregorian calendar. The rift only deepened with the split between East and West in 1054. Something similar is at work with Christmas. The West celebrates Christmas on December 25th, while the East celebrates it on Epiphany, January 6-7, the day commemorating the arrival of the three wise men. In December 2018, while the Ukrainian Orthodox Church remained faithful to Russia, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine formed and was recognized by the Ecumenical Patriarch as autocephalous, or independent of the Moscow Patriarchate of the Russian Orthodox Church in 2019. This year, the Synod of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine decreed that local Orthodox churches could celebrate Christmas on December 25th. Most of them did, further demonstrating their independence from Russia. With all this context, we would like to ask our panelists to respond to the following questions. Firstly, do you believe that common dates for Christmas and especially Easter are possible? Secondly, do you believe that this move by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church could contribute to a move among Orthodox and non-Orthodox churches, especially in the West, to accept a common date for Easter as well? And finally, what do you view as the biggest issue that the churches must overcome in order to agree on a common date for Easter? So those are our questions, that's our topic, and I'd like to go back to those that began our conversation for the first comments.
Well, this is a difficult issue. It's also an issue that is centuries old, and it's difficult in part because it is so old. It's also difficult because of the changes that went on in the church from the 4th century on between East and West, and the further dissidence or difference between them that went on at the split in 1054 and again at the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. The West went west and the East went east, and the West went more toward an urban and capitalistic approach to life, and the East went more toward a socialist and agrarian lifestyle. So I mean, there are some very huge issues that are all part of this. It is also the case that the oldest calendar that Christians use was, in fact, the Julian calendar, which parallels a lot the Jewish calendar and, the Lunar New Year and so forth. These are the kinds of things that are shared in ancient traditions. There was a move by the Caesar to change the rules in terms of calendar and dating so that it would be closer to what he thought was the life of Jesus and so forth. So things became dated in a different way in the West than it was in the East. The East said, we're going to stick with the tradition. And I think it's really important for us to understand that between the two of them, they're talking about tradition. And tradition is something, in a sense, you can talk about the Christian tradition. And the Christian tradition has specific kinds of things that are part of that tradition. They all believe in the birth of Jesus, and the life of Jesus, and the resurrection of Jesus, and the promises of Jesus, his death and resurrection, and the promises that he will come again. All of that is part of what I would call the big T tradition. There are other traditions that go on, like how do you celebrate the Mass in a particular church? I attended an Eastern Rite Catholic church. It'd be the kind of a Catholic church that shows obedience to Rome, but is in an Eastern context. In other words, they live within an Orthodox place. So you go into the church and it has all of the screen up front that's just like an Orthodox church, but it's really a Catholic church. And they do things that are different. Those are traditions, smaller t traditions, which can change with time quite easily. When I look at the issue of the dating of Christmas and the dating of New Year, the dating of Easter, I have to look at that as a small t tradition. Unfortunately, some of these churches believe that it's a big T tradition. And, if Jesus was born sometime in mid-April instead of December 25th, which is really more likely the case, then I don't understand why it has to be a big T tradition. And the East and the West have fought over this for centuries. Only in, I would say, in the 1980s and 1990s did the two come together to ask the question, would it be possible for us to decide on a single calendar that both of us could understand and appreciate and respect? And the conversations continue to go on, facilitated in large part by the World Council of Churches, where the Orthodox are members and they have a close working relationship with the Catholic Church. And the Protestants are all part of the WCC as well. So you have these kinds of conversations that are going on. This situation in Ukraine is a very interesting situation because for the first time, a Ukrainian church or an Orthodox church, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, decided to leave it to the local congregation to make a decision about when they would celebrate Christmas. That means, to me, that it's a small t tradition in the in the Ukrainian church. That was not the case for the Ukrainian church that is part of the Russian Patriarchate, but it was for the independent autocephalous church that is now in Ukraine. So I think the fact that they could change, even though it was done in a sense to say, we don't want to be part of Russia. We have this over againstness. It does show the possibility that they could change. The fact is we have to deal with tradition and we have to deal with pride and perhaps jealousy as well.
Thank you. Tom, what would you like to add?
Thank you. That anything good could come out of war is a wonder, but if the beaten and bruised body of Christ might in some way find a way toward more unity, that would be doubly so. We in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, aren't concerned about cycles of the moon or avoiding the Annunciation, working around that to make sure that you don't butt Easter too close to the Annunciation, and then Annunciation gets pushed around and doesn't get to be exactly 9 months before December 25th. We're not concerned about those kinds of things at all, but we do have a large stake in Christian unity. And any conversations in that regard, we are going to stand up and say, let's be a part of it, let's move it, let's get on down the road, because the church has not faithfully lived up to Christ's prayer in John 17, that all of his followers might be one. The disunity of the church is a continuing discomfort and something that weakens our common witness to the world.
Yeah, I'm going to pass over to Dan in a moment, but one question that I would like us to come back to maybe is this. So, does it matter? We talked a lot about the unity of the church. Does really having Christmas Day and Easter on the same day, does that really matter? Does it really bring unity? I know I'm asking a different question almost to our conversation, but I think it's important. Does it matter? But anyway, Dan, first of all, any thoughts on this conversation?
Well, I can't speak as to whether it matters for individual Christians, but I can tell you that the intercalation of the calendar in ancient times was big business. Yep. And there are reams of law in the Talmud and Jewish tradition about how the priests in ancient times would determine the beginning of the new moon and how they would sound the shofar from the corners of the Temple Mount to announce the coming of the new moon, and what if they made a mistake and this happens. And this used to be really, really big business. And as a Jew, we live with two calendars. We have the secular calendar, and we have the Hebrew calendar. The Hebrew calendar is an interesting calendar because it's a lunar solar calendar. So the lunar calendar is 354 days. And so how does it become a lunar solar calendar? Well, every so often, according to a certain formula, you add a leap month. And next year is actually one of those years where we add the leap month to sort of restore some balance. So that's why Jews are always talking about whether the holidays are early this year or late this year. For some reason, the holidays are never on time, right? They're always early or late, depending on sort of how that Hebrew calendar matches up against its partner, the secular calendar. And I kind of like it. I like it because it makes us think about secular time and holy time. And it makes me think carefully about living in those two worlds, in the secular world and in the holy world. And having that Hebrew calendar guide my life as part of the secular calendar, to me, is really meaningful. To speak a little bit about unity, there is sort of an interesting quirk in the Hebrew calendar. So if you look at the laws about Passover, which we celebrated last week, the Hebrew Bible says that you celebrate a holy convocation on the first day of Passover and on the last day of Passover, which is the seventh day. Because Jews were spread out and they couldn't necessarily count on hearing when the new moon began, there came to be a custom that if you lived outside the land of Israel, that you would celebrate 2 days of the festival instead of one, which is why many Jews will celebrate 2 Seders. They'll celebrate a holiday on the first and the second day of the holiday, and that would mean the holiday for those Jews is 8 days. In Israel, it's 7 days. So for a period of months until the calendars come back in sync, there's actually different Torah portions that are read in Israel than are read in the rest of the world. And I think that also sort of helps us realize that, the land of Israel is a special holy kind of a place. And again, those little quirks in what constitute holy time, I think, can make us more aware and intentional about how we embrace the concept of holy time. So I can't speak as to whether Christmas should be January 6th or 7th or December 25th or when you should celebrate the Easter holiday, but I do know that thinking about holy time is in and of itself a religious act.
That's very interesting. So maybe it's good to have 2 Christmases and 2 Easters because we celebrate double holy time, right?
I don't know. I think that the fact that we chose to follow Caesar's call to go to the Gregorian calendar means that the state, the politicians, were the ones that decided what the church would do, and the church decided to follow or not to follow, and some did and some didn't, and I just find that to be a ridiculous thing.
So you're answering going back to the Orthodox states then?
Yeah, I don't care. We could do that as far as I'm concerned. I have no pride in the fact that we follow one calendar over the other. But there are some people that do. I mean, it's a very important thing. But I do think that anything that we can agree on is something, as you put it, it really is a witness toward Christian unity. And that's really what Jesus wanted. So I do think it's an important discussion to have. And I wish that they would get on with it.
Yeah,
all of them.
Yeah, I think what matters about it, to answer your question directly, is that any conversation that in any way corrects the bitternesses of the past, which have been so destructive of so many lives throughout Christian history, is a good thing and is a God thing.
I think you see that same sort of desire for unity in the Jewish tradition too, where you have Jews who are Orthodox who will observe 2 days of a festival, and then there are Jews who will only observe 1 day because they follow the biblical mandate. And then there's kind of a friction that comes of, well, why are you trespassing on the holiness of the second day when other people say, well, that's just a regular day? And the ways in which we get so animated around these little things really oftentimes, I think, takes us away from what the whole purpose of religious practice is supposed to be, which is to invest yourself in the values and the principles and the holiness that holiday or that holy time is meant to convey. And we get so locked into our way is the right way that we often, I think, start worshiping the law around the day as opposed to investing ourselves in the holiness of what that day is supposed to mean.
Which in the end is a way of saying we end up worshiping ourselves and our own ideas rather than that which is beyond any of us.
So putting this into a real context, how would you go about the kind of dialogue? Because in the example that you gave, Mel, of Ukraine, you've got that that was brought on by a political situation, not by a desire for spiritual unity or understanding between communities. So what might this dialogue look like that would bring some sense of unity over this issue?
Well, discussions have been going on for years, and unfortunately, I was invited to one in Syria years ago and could not go. But I do think that out of that, they had some resolutions that came that said this is possible, we need to keep working on it, we need to keep talking about it, and so forth. What has really messed things up for the moment is the war between Russia and Ukraine, where Ukraine has chosen to make it a political decision in a sense, but it does show that a decision can be made in that direction. So I think that's a good thing. But I do think that it has to be separated from the war.
Right. Right. So overall then, when we look at this, somehow we have to move the conversation away from the political and maybe even away to self-interest altogether, or I am right and you are wrong. Yeah. It's got to be something else that kind of pulls the conversation together. And that seems to be very difficult on a number of fronts when it comes to unity. All right, thank you very much. Good conversation, and we're now going to take a break.
We hope you're enjoying today's program. If you'd like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the vision and history of the program, and we invite you to become a ministry partner Explore our Town Hall Estates healthcare facilities and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, we look forward to receiving your letters. You may write us at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. If you have a prayer request, please send it to prayerrequest@americanreligious.org. Thank you for writing and thank you for watching. Now, back to today's closing statements.
Welcome back, viewers, and please remember that we do like to hear from you. Have an idea for a show, please share that with us. Your comments on shows, please share those. And of course, anything that we can do for you, any way we can pray for you, please let us know. And now to our closing comments from today's show. Tom.
Thank you. Conversations about unity are critical to who we are in my tradition. That's the way we began. That's the way we have always projected ourselves into the larger conversation within the Christian community. And the feeling is not simply that institutions need to come together, which they do. Not simply that human beings need to learn how to talk to each other, which they do, but that the overarching concern is to give expression to the oneness of that Holy Spirit that is beyond us, the one that calls us into being and creates us and gives us the values by which we live. And so any conversation in that direction, any move toward erasing the innumerable divisions that human beings have between themselves is a good thing and is to be pursued.
I find myself often in the Assemblies of God to be in a difficult ground in the sense that many of my own people don't believe much in Christian unity if it means working with these kind of mainline, what they would call liberal churches or the Catholic Church or whatever. But I have a call from God that that's what I was supposed to do, and I've tried to be faithful to that call for 35 years. But it's not an easy thing to do. It's very difficult to do that. And I recently attended the assembly of the World Council of Churches in November of 2022, in which the question from the floor was raised about, well, what about these Russian churches? The Russians are attacking the Ukrainians. Both churches are part of the World Council of Churches. Can we excommunicate the Russian church from the World Council and so forth? And the discussion was led by the head of the World Council of Churches, who said, no, we're not going to tolerate that kind of division. We're not going to push them out. We need to be talking. The Ukrainians and the Russians need to be talking. They need to have a safe place, and we need to be supportive of those conversations as they decide what's going on over the next few months and years. So I do think it's really important for us to understand that even though politics sometimes transcends a lot of things, Christians together need to be talking to each other about common kinds of things, not just calendars, but also wars where Christians are fighting against Christians.
Thank you.
So as I was listening to this conversation, a Broadway tune jumped into my head, of Tevye the milkman and Fiddler on the Roof yelling, "Tradition!" And without our traditions, our lives would be as shaky as a fiddler on a roof.
Yeah.
And tradition is in many ways the structure that kind of helps our lives make sense. It's the structure that helps us to make meaning. And what traditions are habitual practices, ritual practices that convey and establish meaning. So you asked a wonderful question before, which is, what's the point? And what would be the source of that dialogue? And wouldn't it be great if the source of that dialogue was about what is the meaning you want your tradition to convey as opposed to just tradition for tradition's sake? Yeah. What if there could be a meaningful conversation between Jews and Christians about what are your core values and your principles that animate your hold on the tradition that you follow? And if you could have a conversation that went to that place, you might find that you could find, at least through a lens of curiosity, a better understanding of why certain traditions hold so much meaning to certain people. And then you might find that there's also more room to find perhaps some sense of unanimity around the traditions that might be able to unite a diverse religious body.
Thank you. I think this has been a very interesting conversation, not just because of the question of dates and calendars. Appreciated the conversation too about the sanctity of time, but also that sense of what is it that is critical to unify us. We just as humans, especially the multiplicity of traditions that we might have, tends to pull us apart. I mean, that's just what we do. We pull apart. We own our own space and think everyone should be where we are and have that reluctance to move towards another. So what's the difference between uniformity and unity? And sometimes I think we spend a lot of energy and time focusing on uniformity, which is why I asked my question, does the calendar matter so much? When really, unity is not necessarily the same as uniformity. We don't always have to be the same things. Going back to the sense of what's our shared values? What are the shared things that pull us together? What can we absolutely agree on? And how much time do we spend on that compared to the things that are maybe more uniformity questions, where we're probably never going to agree? But it's easier for us to argue about that maybe than to actually ask the hard questions. So the hard questions may be the unity questions. The Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And so now, friends, until next week, at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you. Thank you.